Hey, everybody. So, one of the most common questions that I get, and one of the biggest challenges that I think a lot of law firm owners have is how to set your budget. How do you figure out what is it that you're going to need for payroll? What is it that you're going to need for marketing? What is it that you're going to need to be saving? And what should you be getting for profit? Most of us lawyers, especially if you're a small law firm owner, probably didn't want to ever have to do math. But math is a really critical component. One of my mentors said that business is simply a math equation, and it really is. So let's talk about how to determine and how to set a budget for your firm. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out what is your revenue. All right, so we're gonna start at $500,000. Let's say that your goal for revenue is 500 grand, $500,000, which is nice for a small firm that maybe has one or two attorneys. So what would that take? All right. So your monthly means that you're going to bring in about $41,667 a month. Now, that's the average, right? That's, every month is not going to be exactly the same. Some months hopefully are going to be a little bit higher, but you're going to have other months that are going to be lower. And we're going to come back to that because that becomes really important down the road. But what you could expect if you're going to be doing $500,000 a year, then your revenue is going to be about $41,000. Okay. Your payroll. Now, your payroll includes your salary. It needs to include your salary, and you should be paying yourself a salary. And I talk about that in another video about why that's so important. But payroll, let's use the number 45%. Okay. What I have found over the years, working in our own firm, plus working with other firms, is that 45% is a pretty good standard. If you can get lower, great. But you really need to be thinking about 45%. And I put 45% away into the payroll account each time money comes in because I know that's where we're going to be. So your payroll, if it's at 45% of your revenue, is going to be $18,750. All right. And that's going to include your salary. Okay. What you were paying yourself. All right. Marketing. You're going to need to have some marketing. Now, if you are, someone who works strictly on referrals, your numbers may vary. As a matter of fact, your numbers may vary across this. If you're at $500,000, you're probably not spending this much on marketing. But if you're going to grow, you're going to need to spend at least this much. So let's look at 15%. So let's say right now you're going, I'm at 500,000 and I want to grow. So I'm going to put 15% of my revenue into my marketing. And what is that? That's $6,250. Okay. Now, the next category, which is really, really important, and I can't emphasize this enough, is profit. All right. And your profit should be 10% plus minimum. Okay. You need to make more money than you're spending. Otherwise, what's the point of having a business? Now you just have a job, right? If it all evens out, you need to bring in more money than you're spending. And a very, I would say, minimal number is 10%. You need to be bringing in at least 10%. And I'm going to explain why. So what would that be? On 10% on $500,000, 41,66.7 a month is $4,167 a month. Now, you should, in my opinion, be putting that in the bank, not spending it. All right. It's your money. You can take it out as a draw, but the smart move, especially if you're going to start growing, is to put that money in the bank. Why? Why is that so important? Well, it's so important because what if your revenue this month is, say, 30 grand instead of 41? How are you going to make up the difference, right? Because you've got $18,000 in payroll, you got $6,200 in marketing. So what's that? That's 24, 29, call it $30,000, right? What about your general overhead? Because what's not included in here is your overhead, your rent, your software subscriptions, your Microsoft, your Adobe, LexisNexis, whatever your research forum is. So understand that this isn't all your money. This is just how you're going to be budgeting, and then the rest is going to be what you're going to use to basically run your business, which in this particular case is 30%. Now, 30% is a lot, okay? But if you're only at 500,000, depending on how much your office space is, you may be spending that kind of money. Now let's ramp this up a little bit. Let's say your revenue, maybe this is your goal, or maybe this is where you are, but $1 million, okay? Join the $1 Million Club, which is a significant amount of revenue especially for a small firm. So what does that mean? That means that you're bringing in, on the average, $83,334 a month, okay? Which means you should have some months that are over 100 grand, and you're going to have some months that maybe are around 50 or 60. Again, you're going to have to be able to make up the difference. Your payroll, in order to do that, is going to double. So you're at $37,500. That's going to be your payroll at 45% of $1 million, right? And again, this number is stable. This number here, your revenue isn't. It changes. It goes up, it goes down. But your payroll, this is the money that you've already obligated to your staff, right? You've already told them that you were going to pay that. Your marketing at 15% is going to be $12,500. Now, in all honesty, you need to have numbers like that in order to really do well on LSA, pay-per-click, Google. There's a certain number that if you don't invest a certain number of in marketing in Google, you're not going to be on the front page, right? And so it's not going to be terribly effective. Once you get up into these kinds of numbers, $12,000 a month, while there's a lot of firms who spend, literally hundreds of thousands a month, you can start making a difference. You can start really growing. There are companies that would tell you that you need to be spending 20% on marketing. And I don't disagree with that, especially if you're trying to grow, but minimum should be 15. And again, at your 10% profit, you're going to be bringing in $8,334 a month. And again, you should be putting all of that money in the bank, in my opinion. Now, I think quarterly you could take a draw out. This is the way I did it, is every quarter, depending on how much of this money I was able to save, I might take out a draw to do something fun with it. But especially when you're in that growing stage, you want to be saving this. You want to be saving this as much as absolutely possible, because things like COVID happens. You have a month, if this month here, instead of bringing in 83,000, let's say you brought in 50. Now you got, you're already at $50,000 just with your payroll and marketing. It doesn't include your overhead and your profit. So you can have bad months. And on months that are really good, let's say you have $100,000, you should be saving as much money as you possibly can, so that you can continue to grow. So maybe you can bump up your marketing, or maybe you can go hire an A player. All right, now I want to just kind of finish this off to let you know that this is not theoretical. Okay, I'm going to actually share with you numbers that we had in 2019, and the reason that I'm going to share those numbers is 2020 was COVID and everything was weird. In 2021, we recovered, and the numbers were pretty similar to 2019. And then after that, I sold the firm, and I'm not going to share, somebody else's numbers. So these are numbers that were true and actual when I was running the firm and we were cooking with gas. So in 2019, we did 1.12 million. Okay, that was our revenue. That was a good year. That was not the first time we were over $1 million, but that was a good year for us. Our expenses, all right, our expenses were $988,000, okay, which meant that our expenses were 87.86% of our revenue. So what did that mean? That meant that we basically had 12% profit, all right? Because what is profit? Profit is simply revenue minus expenses is profit. So we had 12%, approximately 12% of profit. And almost all of that money went in the bank. And thank goodness it did, because when COVID hit, we had $100,000 sitting in the bank. And so, we didn't have to borrow money. We didn't have to go to the bank. We didn't have, we could self-fund until we adjusted and figured out what the heck we were going to do. All right, here's the other numbers that are important. Our payroll. Our payroll that year was 43.71% of our revenue. All right, so we were right on target, 45%. I would put, for every dollar that came in, I would put 45 cents into the payroll account, which meant that at the end of the year, I had actually I was a couple of payrolls ahead, because I was, 1% ahead, but that adds up over a period of time, especially when you're talking about these kinds of numbers. So 45%, I'm not pulling that number out of the air. That's what we did. We did just slightly less than that. Our marketing that particular year was 13.64%. All right. So again, this 15% of marketing, I'm not pulling these numbers out of a hat. We were very, very close to that. We were a little bit a hair under it, a percentage and a half, which is pretty darn close when you're trying to budget. You're not. It's difficult to be spot on with everything. And as I said, our profit wound up being 12%, okay, which is better than what we had set out at 10%. So, here's two other numbers that I'm going to share with you. That year, our actualized billable hour was $236 an hour. So when I say actualized, I mean collected, put in the bank. All right. You can bill at $500 an hour. That's great. But how much did you actually collect? So you take your revenue and you divide it by the number of hours that you worked, number of billable hours that your legal team worked. And for us, it was $236 an hour. Now, here's the other number that was super important to understand. For our expenses, it was $207. Okay, so in order to make our overhead, we had to bill $207. It was actually closer to $208. Okay, so our profit margin was $28 a month, or $28 an hour, I should say. $28 an hour was our profit margin for every hour. It's good. It's not great. It could have been better, but at least we knew that we had to be bringing in at least $208 an hour just to cover our overhead, to cover these other bills. All right, when you're starting to figure out how to do the math, and how to set a budget, understand these numbers, and then you can start to make reasonable estimations about what it's going to cost for payroll, marketing, and what your profits should be, which are the big ticket items. All right, everybody, I hope this is helpful.